Well, hello all. In this video, we're going to talk about how ecosystems are balanced. Particularly, we're going to focus on what's known as a keystone species. What I want you to keep in mind throughout this lecture is how disruptions to biotic or to abiotic factors may lead to a change within an ecosystem. We're going to focus on this example here, which I'm showing you with the 4 pictures on top, of a simple food chain involving kelp, sea urchins, sea otters, and then killer whales. Let's take a look first at how this particular food chain works, and we're going to use this as an opportunity to use some of the terminology that we've learned in the past. So first, we have our kelp, which is our producer. Recall that producers are organisms that can make their own energy. In particular, kelp, like plants and some photosynthetic bacteria and protists, are able to produce their own energy from sunlight. The sea urchins eat the kelp, so sea urchins then are primary consumers. Sea otters consume the sea urchins, and so sea otters are secondary consumers. And killer whales consume the sea otters. And so in this case, killer whales are not only the tertiary consumer, but they are also the apex predator. They are at the top of our food chain and at the top of our energy pyramid. But the organisms within this ecosystem here have more roles than just what we've defined for them as being producers and consumers. For example, the kelp provides a habitat for a variety of populations of fish and other types of organisms, including shellfish. In addition, the kelp serves as a way to sequester or capture carbon dioxide from either the seawater or the atmosphere, and it converts that carbon dioxide into organic molecules like sugars through the process of photosynthesis. And so here, kelp has 2 niches that we've just defined for it. The sea otters are known as what we call a keystone species. Now, in order to understand what a keystone species is, let's first talk about what a keystone is. And I want to show you the picture on the bottom left-hand corner here. This is representing an arch from an aqueduct in Italy. And what you'll notice here, if you understand architecture, you'll know that the middle stone at the top of this archway is known as a keystone. And the function of keystones in architecture is to hold together arches. Without keystones, the arch actually falls apart. And that keystone is really important to help bear the weight for the full arch. Well, in similar fashion, keystone species function a lot like keystones and archways. They hold together an ecosystem. And without them, the ecosystem can look dramatically different than it does with that keystone species being present. And in fact, in locations like California, off the coast of Big Sur, California, we've seen a breakdown in this ecosystem from time to time. What's been noticed is that when sea otter levels drop quite low, in fact, at one point in the early 1900s, the number of sea otters was as low as 50 off the coast of Big Sur. What we find is that the population of sea urchins increases dramatically. And so instead of our food chain looking like this, it looks like this, where the sea otter population has been decimated to the point where we no longer have a consumer of the sea urchins. The killer whales in this case would be okay. If we were to look at the more broad food web, killer whales do have other sources of energy beyond the sea otter. However, the sea urchins have very few natural predators. The sea otter is the only one off of Big Sur, California. And so the result of this disruption is that we will find sea urchins overeating. Their population will explode now that they don't have a predator to control the size of the population. We'll see a loss in the habitat as kelp are being eaten. And actually what happens is the sea urchin eat off the base of the kelp. That's going to lead to these tall stems of the kelp that you see in this picture here, being released or from the soil, and the release of the kelp from that is going to lead to their death. And because the kelp die, we also see an increase in CO2 levels because now there is no aquatic plant, or at least a great reduction in the number of aquatic plants that can capture CO2. And so what we've just covered here is how this ecosystem, just even this simple one, is incredibly interdependent. The health of the kelp and the health of the habitat is dependent on the presence of the sea otter, controlling the size of the sea urchin population. And we see this often with keystone species, where the loss of them can lead to dramatic changes within the ecosystem. Remember that each organism within an ecosystem has a niche, and some of those niches may be in part just to consume and control the size of other populations. Now, I'm not going to write down additional notes, but I do want to have a quick conversation on the role of abiotic factors in these ecosystems as well. As you'll see in the example that we use to talk about this particular issue of balanced ecosystems, you're going to look at how acid and how temperatures affect the Great Barrier Reef in off the coast of Australia. And so it's important to note that organisms have been adapted to survive in particular set of conditions. And we talked about how that adaptation is a result of natural selection. Well, as the ecosystems change due to rising temperatures, due to changes in precipitation, or increased presence of CO2 in the atmosphere and dissolved in the oceans, we might find that these ecosystems become disrupted. And so it's not only the biotic factors that are influencing the balance of these ecosystems, it is also the abiotic factors.